What if you could diagnose hundreds of diseases from diabetes to cancer with a single painless drop of blood from your fingertip? What if you could put the power of a sophisticated medical lab inside a small, elegant box in every Walgreens, in every home, in every corner of the world? This was the revolutionary, world-changing promise of a company called Theranos and its charismatic founder, a young woman who was being hailed as the next Steve Jobs. Her name was Elizabeth Holmes. She was a Stanford dropout with a messianic vision, a deep, hypnotic voice, and a uniform of black turtlenecks. By her early 30s, she was the world's youngest self-made female billionaire, gracing the covers of magazines and sharing stages with world leaders. She had assembled a board of directors that included former secretaries of state and four-star generals. She was the undisputed queen of Silicon Valley. But there was one tiny problem with her multi-billion-dollar company. The technology, the revolutionary blood testing device she promised, did not work. It was all a lie. John Carreyrou's Bad Blood is the definitive, gripping and jaw-dropping story of the biggest corporate fraud since Enron. But it's more than just a story of a failed company. It is a deep, philosophical inquiry into the dark side of ambition, the terrifying power of a beautiful and dangerous idea, and the ease with which a charismatic leader can create a reality distortion field that fools some of the most powerful and intelligent people on the planet. This is a modern-day fable about the razor-thin line between vision and fraud. The visionary in the black turtleneck. To understand the meteoric rise of Theranos, you have to understand the powerful myth that Elizabeth Holmes so carefully constructed around herself. She was not just a CEO, she was a character, a persona designed for maximum impact. She consciously modeled herself after her idol, Steve Jobs. She adopted his signature black turtleneck as her daily uniform. She spoke in a deep, carefully modulated and slightly unnatural baritone voice. And she had a story. It was a perfect Silicon Valley origin story. She told the world that she had a lifelong fear of needles and that this fear had inspired her to drop out of Stanford University at age 19 to start a company that would make blood testing painless and accessible to everyone. Her mission was not just to make money, it was to change the world, to democratize healthcare, to save lives. It was a story that was almost impossible to resist. It was a story about a brilliant young female visionary who was going to disrupt a staid and inefficient industry, all for the good of humanity. This story, this carefully crafted myth, was her greatest product. It was far more effective than any piece of technology she would ever build. And it was this story that allowed her to begin assembling one of the most powerful and influential boards of directors in corporate history. She attracted titans of industry and politics. Former Secretary of State George Shultz, former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, former Secretary of Defense William Perry. These were not tech experts. They were powerful, older men who were completely captivated by her charisma, her intelligence, and the world-changing power of her vision. They lent her their credibility, their connections, and their reputations. With their backing, the myth of Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos became an unstoppable force, the reality distortion field. With a legendary board and a powerful story, the money began to pour in. Elizabeth Holmes was a master fundraiser. She raised hundreds of millions of dollars from some of the most sophisticated investors in the world, including Rupert Murdoch and the Walton family of Walmart. She did this by creating what people in Silicon Valley call a reality distortion field. It was an aura of extreme confidence, secrecy, and revolutionary promise that made people suspend their disbelief. The key to this reality distortion field was secrecy. Holmes insisted that Theranos' technology was so revolutionary that it had to be protected at all costs. She fostered a culture of extreme paranoia. Employees were forbidden from talking to each other about their work. Different departments were siloed, unable to communicate so that no single person could ever see the full picture. She was constantly flanked by a team of imposing security guards. This intense secrecy had a paradoxical effect. Instead of raising red flags, it made investors and partners even more curious. It created the illusion that something incredibly valuable and groundbreaking must be happening behind those closed doors. She used this aura of secrecy to her advantage in her presentations. She would show potential investors and partners sleek, impressive-looking devices which she named the Edison machine. She would perform seemingly miraculous demonstrations, taking a tiny drop of blood from their finger and promising to run a full panel of tests. But it was all a carefully staged piece of theater. The machines often malfunctioned. The results they showed were often fake. And as the company grew, and the pressure mounted, the deceptions became more and in the end, catastrophic. While the outside world saw a revolutionary company poised to change the world, the inside of Theranos was a nightmare. Bad Blood is filled with the stories of the brilliant, idealistic, and often young employees who came to work for Theranos, believing they were part of a noble mission, only to discover a toxic culture of fear, intimidation, and outright fraud. The first thing new employees realized was that the revolutionary technology did not work. The Edison machines were unreliable, prone to breaking down, and produced wildly inaccurate results. The company's scientists were locked in a desperate and ultimately hopeless struggle to try and make the science match Elizabeth's promises. But Holmes was not interested in scientific reality. She was interested in maintaining the myth. When employees raised concerns about the failures of the technology, they were met with a wall of hostility. They were told they were not true believers, that they were being negative. If they pushed the issue, they were unceremoniously fired. The company was notorious for its high turnover rate. It was a revolving door of talented people who either quit in disgust or were fired for asking too many questions. This toxic culture led to the central, damning fraud of the entire company. In order to fulfill its much-hyped deal to put its technology in Walgreens stores, Theranos had to actually start testing real blood from real patients. But their own machines couldn't do it. So Holmes and her second-in-command, Sunny Balwani, made a fateful decision. They secretly bought commercially available standard blood testing machines from companies like Siemens. They then modified these machines, a process that often made them less reliable, and they ran the majority of their patient samples on this third-party equipment, all while claiming to the world that the tests were being performed on their own revolutionary proprietary technology. This was the point of no return. The company was no longer just an ambitious startup that was struggling with its technology. It was now a massive, active fraud, putting the health of real patients at risk every single day with inaccurate and unreliable test results. The whistleblowers and the journalist. This is where the heroes of the story emerge. The conscience of Bad Blood lies with the handful of brave young employees who saw the fraud and the danger, and who decided that they could not stay silent, no matter the personal cost. One of the most compelling of these figures is a young man named Tyler Schultz. Tyler was a bright-eyed and idealistic recent Stanford graduate who came to work at Theranos. He was also, in a twist of fate, the grandson of one of Theranos' most powerful and influential board members, the former Secretary of State, George Shultz. Tyler was initially a true believer, but he was quickly horrified by the scientific fraud he witnessed. He saw the company faking its proficiency results for regulators. He saw the wildly inaccurate results the machines were producing. He tried to raise the alarm internally. He went to his grandfather, believing that if he could just explain the situation, George Shultz would intervene. But his grandfather, like so many others, was completely under the spell of Elizabeth Holmes. He didn't believe his own grandson. He chose to believe the charismatic young visionary instead. This decision created a painful rift in the Schultz family, as Tyler was forced to choose between his loyalty to his family and his professional and moral duty to tell the truth. It was Tyler Schultz, and a few other brave whistleblowers like him, who finally decided to reach out to an investigative journalist at the Wall Street Journal, the author of this book, John Carreyrou. Carreyrou is the other hero of this story. He received the first anonymous tip about Theranos, and his journalistic instincts told him that there was a huge story hiding beneath the surface. When Elizabeth Holmes learned that John Carreyrou was investigating her, she unleashed the full force of her legal and financial power to try and kill the story. Theranos hired the famously aggressive and feared lawyer, David Boies, who had represented Al Gore in the 2000 presidential election recount. Boies and his team of lawyers began a ruthless campaign of intimidation. They followed former employees. They sent threatening legal letters to Carreyrou's sources, threatening to sue them for hundreds of millions of dollars if they spoke to him. They put immense pressure on the Wall Street Journal's parent company, which was owned by Rupert Murdoch, who was also a major investor in Theranos. It was a siege, a full-scale war designed to protect the lie at all costs. But Carreyrou and his editors at the Journal refused to back down, and the whistleblowers, despite the terrifying pressure, held their ground. In October of 2015, the Wall Street Journal published Carreyrou's first explosive article, a front-page story that exposed the deceptions at the heart of Theranos. The story was a bombshell. It was the first crack in the company's carefully constructed facade, and once the first crack appeared, the entire structure began to collapse. More sources came forward. Regulators launched investigations. Walgreens pulled out of the deal. The company that had once been valued at $9 billion was revealed to be a house of cards. The myth was shattered. The reality distortion field had collapsed. Elizabeth Holmes, the visionary, was exposed as a fraud. The ultimate message of Bad Blood is a timeless and powerful cautionary tale. It is a story about the dark side of our own desires. We want to believe in miracles. We want to believe that a single brilliant visionary can solve our most complex problems with a simple, elegant solution. And it is this very human desire to believe that can make us vulnerable to deception. Bad Blood is a profound inquiry into the nature of truth, the seductive power of a good story, and the incredible courage it takes to be the one who stands up and says, "The emperor has no clothes." If you believe that the truth matters, and that we must learn from our greatest deceptions, then you are in the right place. Welcome to Geeky Philosopher. Subscribe, and let's continue to explore the hidden stories that shape our world.